Our today's topic is about the fossil form and function, and in which we will be discussing about the growth and form. We know what is the form. Form is the external shape or morphology of a fossil, and it is encompassing every aspect of the fossil. Fossil के जो बैरूनी अतवार हैं, जो उसके बाहर जो भी चीजें हमें नजर आ रही हैं फॉसिल के बारे में, उसको हम फॉसिल की फॉर्म कहते हैं. Darwin gave us an evolutionary way of form. He was astonished by the variety of external appearances and by their wonderful adaptation to life. जो भी फॉसिल हम इन्वायरमेंट में देखते हैं उसमें हमें बहुत सी अपीयरेंसेस नजर आएंगे, और जो भी ऑर्गेनिज्म पुराने अदवार में रहे होंगे उनकी जो भी करेक्टरिस्टिक्स और एडेप्टेशंस, वी कैन ऑब्जर्व दोज एडेप्टेशंस इन द फॉसिल फॉर्म. उसकी मॉर्फोलॉजी में वी कैन ऑब्जर्व दैट फॉर्म एंड वी कैन इंटरप्रेट दैट फॉर्म इन द फॉसिल्स. The form or external appearance of any microbe, plant and animal is shaped by the evolution. So that means if we know how the form is changing with the time, we can know that how that organism has evolved during the course of his evolution. For example, in the birds, the wing for flight can be seen in the ancient fossils, just like Archaeopteryx, that fossil that we have seen in the earlier lectures, and we can compare those wings to the modern birds. And so is the case for the long beak and the tongue of hummingbird. If we want to see that how a beak which would have been used in the previous generations or in the ancestors for a different purpose, now hummingbird is using that beak and long tongue to see the particular flowers and to get the nectar from those flowers. And Darwin was clever enough to predict that certain flowers are present which are, just like the beak of the hummingbird or the tongue of hummingbird. So if there is a flower, the beak or the tongue will be going into that flower and it will be sucking nectar out of it. And after the Darwin's demise, we have discovered such flowers in the islands of Galapagos. So now the next thing about the form is the sexual selection. So the morphology is sometimes giving rise to the sexual selection. The sexual selection is a set of evolutionary processes that depend on the interaction between the sexes. As we have discussed in the earlier lecture, there is the sexual selection between the peacocks. The peacock, the male, has very beautiful patterns on its feathers or plumage, and based on it, the female is choosing her life partner. So the astonishing tail and color of male birds that are sort of acting as a selection for the female birds, and female birds are attracted to those feathers, and they will reproduce with such males who have more beautiful or more astonishing plumage. Now, here we have to consider that the plumage does not attract any predators. If evolutionarily there is a disadvantage of the plumage, then those males will not be selected and they will be eliminated from the evolutionary race. Now, we will be talking about the adaptations. What is adaptation? The plant and animals have adaptation that function in context of both natural and sexual selection. So, adaptation is some sort of characteristics that help an organism to survive in an adverse environment. And of course, environment is always adverse. We are living in a world where there are resources always in limited quantity. So an adaptation is aspect of a form that performs a physical or behavioral function, and that is sort of good for an organism. If there is an adaptation, it will ultimately help that organism to survive. So now, what are the importance of form? If the information that we get from the appearance or morphology of the fossils, how can we, get some information, or what is the importance of it? So form is the only evidence we have in fossils for identifying species and wider relationships. Now, if we don't have that information, we cannot assess that if this fossil is a trilobite or an Archaeopteryx. We can see the form. We have seen the form, just like in the example of Archaeopteryx, we can see the form in the form of wings. We can see that in the form of Archaeopteryx, there are wings, and we compare those wings with the modern birds, and there we can see the importance that this gives us some information about the evolution of birds from the reptiles, because Archaeopteryx is a midway link between the reptiles and the birds. And form can also tell us about the behavior and ecology of an organism. An organism may have some changes in an ecology, or due to its behavioral patterns, or how form does also, as we have discussed in the previous lectures, that form also encompasses of the trace fossils. So that means the form can tell us that if an organism, how it is behaving, or what sort of environment it is living. And the form also tells us the study of changes in the form of through time, inform us about the evolution. So if form is changing with time, it will also tell us that one particular organism, how it is changing in a lineage, and how its species has changed from the earlier forms of the fossils to the later form of the fossils in the later strata of the fossils. Now, in the end, we know that how can we recognize the ancient species through the form, right? So paleontologists use the morphological species concept. That means we are not having any other information about the fossil, just like internal organs, or how did they work, what was their physiological conditions, how were they moving. We don't have that. We just have their morphological ideas or the concept, and based on that, we are having an idea of form. And using that, we can identify the ancient species. Now, there are some variations among the species, and we will be discussing that in the next lecture. And how can we say that what is the average size or shape or form of a species? We have the statistical observations that define the mean or average characteristics of the species. We will be discussing more about the variation among the species or the fossil species in the next lecture.